Hello, everybody. How's everybody feeling today? All right, so I want to start my talk off today by asking you all a question. If you could have dinner with anybody in the world, who would it be with? I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. Your answers most likely vary from mine. It could be a deceased great-grandmother, a fictional character, or a famous historical leader. Now, I want to make you think about that question a little bit more. What if that person had to be still alive and unrelated to you? I'll give you a few more seconds. Now, your reasoning for that most likely is different from mine as well. It could be that one person who is a leader in an industry that you've always cared about, or a politician who you fundamentally disagree with, or someone you just really aspire to be like. It could be a world-changing internet activist, or maybe a rocket scientist, or a leading advocate for gender equality. Now, a lot of times when we think about these people, these influential leaders, we see them as far removed from our lives. We either place them on pedestals, or we imagine them as perfect human beings incapable of making any mistakes. Most times, those granted the opportunity to have this discussion with these leaders come from places like wealthier backgrounds or have connections and tremendous resources to be able to have these real connections with these leaders. Now, some of the people that you may have had in mind, you've dreamt about being able to see live. But a lot of those opportunities to see those people in person happen to look like this. You either have to pay thousands of dollars a plate for a dinner at an expensive gala or something like that, or you're in an auditorium shoved in with about 100 other people or more, and you're just craning your neck to get a glimpse of that person. And when we think about that, that can't possibly be any genuine connection coming out of that, right? And so in 2016, finding inspiration from the Iowa caucuses, we saw that presidential candidates and Des Moines voters were able to have real connections and authentic connections, very different from simply seeing somebody far away, because these were the people that mattered. Now, inspired by that, my brother and I sought to find a way to tackle those issues discussed earlier, and we formed a way of being able to retain those intimate connections, a small group of people coming together, free of any monetary incentives, and having opportunities for those lacking the resources to pay thousands for a gala or being far removed from everything else. So, in the spring, we founded a nonprofit, and further, we were discussing a little bit more about who are the people who are missing from these conversations, specifically the global conversations or the positions of power. And those people, the answer to all of that is youth, particularly youth from under-resourced communities. And so the two of us, later that spring, we founded mouthful.org, which brings together 6 high school students, 1 influential leader, and 1 mouthful representative for dinner together at a restaurant. 8 people, that's it. So none of those huge gymnasiums where you have to go far away, you can barely see them in the corner. Instead, you're right across the table from them, sharing an appetizer, sharing a pizza. And so in these connections, you are able to really have the conversations that you've aspired to ask. You can talk about whatever it's like to really live in the or to work in the White House, or to work alongside someone who you personally have thought about for ages. And so how it works for a nonprofit is that we begin with a prospective guest. We reach out to them and we think about, okay, who are some people who not only would be interested in hearing from other students, but students would also be interested in hearing about their backstory, about what they have really gone through in their life. Next, we work with our partner organizations, which are community-based organizations such as College Track, One Goal, A Better Chance and KIP in the United States, as well as SEO London and Oxford Hub, to find promising students who are really interested in talking and having a dinner with a selected guest. Next, we fill in the students with the information about what they would like, just getting them thinking about what they would want to talk about. Afterwards, we find the right restaurants, we look for funding, all coming from grants, and then we just eat. And so over the last 4 years, we have hosted dinners with executives from Twitter, Facebook, Salesforce, Yahoo. We have held dinners with mayors, as well as multiple Peabody Award-winning journalists, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists, former administration in the Obama administration, as well as heads from the DNC and RNC, and environmentalists and activists. One highlight was having a dinner at the SpaceX factory and having a tour by the president herself. And so a lot of times, when we think about these mouthful dinners, what's really, really important about them is that we have one mouthful representative who is always a student. There's only one adult at that dinner, and that is the guest themselves. And because of that, the conversations are free from the media, free from any photography that is going out into the world, or anything that will really influence the way that people are speaking. And those are raw conversations. You show the vulnerability behind that. You show what is it really like working in the White House? What is it really like having to balance your home life and your family life and your work? And what if your ideals don't connect exactly what you're supposed to do in your job? And so, due to COVID-19, we had to move our model online. And that's not necessarily the same exact feeling as, oh my gosh, I'm standing right across the seat from somebody who's exactly in the position that I want to be with in 20 years. But we thought, okay, what's one way we can sort of get around that? And we thought, well, food, you can't have a dinner without food. And so we decided we would use gift cards from food delivery services to retain that intimate feeling of having dinner with a guest and having that conversation, but you're having a really important conversation about the US government and then eating tacos at the same time and showing people your tacos. And so what else is really, really important about these is that you have this power of the vulnerability of, in that instance, you have these connections from people from different communities. It could be, or a very similar community. So it could be, you're talking to someone who has a very similar upbringing and you would never know that just by seeing them online. Simply having a conversation, you're starting that conversation of something you would have never guessed purely on television. For example, what's especially most important is that when we have these interesting connections of, I don't necessarily agree with that student who's sitting across from me, or I don't agree with the person who's standing in front of me who's had 40 years of experience. And because we're away from that media, and because we're not filled with thousands of other people in the room, we can have those conversations. And what's really personally interesting as somebody who's helped found this is knowing what the students are able to take away from these conversations. And that it's a lot more than saying simply having bragging rights or taking a selfie or being able to say, oh, yeah, I had dinner with that mayor who's on TV or whoever, that woman there. Instead, it's seeing that woman on TV celebrating a huge win and knowing that she had told you about a traumatic experience in her life who made her in that situation. And it is that and knowing that you can possibly see yourself in that woman, or you are really able to have that connection and you know a little bit more about what you want to do with your life. And so reading things like this and knowing that it's a lot more than just simply sitting there, you leave the dinner, and then you can just click that off your checklist. And so, finally, I want to say, as youth, challenge yourself to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And you don't have to have dinner with a politician or whatever, but just find the people you wouldn't necessarily have a conversation with. That could be your neighbor, the person sitting across from you at dinner who you never would have talked about, but simply just start a conversation. You have as much to give to other people as you have to learn. Now, I want to leave you with one final question. I started off asking who you wanted to have dinner with, but now, if you could have dinner with anybody in the world, when will it be?